Hi people, just a disclaimer that's incense smoke if anyone's wondering. With everything that's going on in the world, what I'm going to talk about here may seem relatively trivial, and it's something I've kind of put off because there were more important things to cover in this channel. Nevertheless, I read newspapers extensively, and this is something that I've noticed, and it's something I think it's worth talking about at least a little bit. I'm going to quote one particular columnist just to make my point, but this is by no means isolated or unique. I'm talking about what I consider to be misandry in journalism. I'm sick of it. I think this is a very notable thing that we see in journalism today, where you get feminist writers, feminist columnists, and they just make sweeping statements about men and or boys, and they get away with it. They've a green light to do it. Now, just to be clear, I don't favour censorship. I'm not calling for them to be censored, but there is obvious double standards. If a male journalist were to write a sweeping attack on women, or a male columnist for that matter, he would absolutely be pilloried as a misogynist dinosaur, and he would be out of work. If he was make any sort of illusion of generalizing women, I think he would be out of work, even in the tabloids. I just don't think it would happen. And this isn't hyperbole. This isn't something I'm just inventing. I have seen this over and over and over again. And like I say, I read newspapers extensively. So this is a piece by Lucy Mangan in the Eye. It's from the 3rd of June. This is the piece I'm reading now. I could look at, I can guarantee you something like this will be in the national paper at least once a day, something along these lines. The basic gist of her argument in this opinion piece is about supposedly the different way in which men and women read. There may be some truth in it, but this is what I really take issue with, and I'm going to just quote part of her piece here. Women are raised from birth to evade themselves, to cater to others, to put themselves in others' shoes, so that they can best understand how to act to please, or at least not anger, the individual or the group. So this is a positive generalization about women. Naturally, this carries on over into purely imaginative spaces too. Boys, not so much. So according to Lucy Mangan, boys are raised to lack empathy. Boys are raised to be selfish and aggressive. But as boys grow older, do they not become more curious about the world and the women in it? I mean, I know they get curious about women in very specific ways for a while. No subtlety there in what she means. But after that, is there no impetus to find out what is going on in all those other books? What the world looks like from a fundamentally different perspective. This is absurd. This is just a lazy generalization of men and boys. And like I say, this is the sort of thing that just gets a green pass. Now, people might think I'm reading too much into it, and in the grand scheme of things, it should be relatively trivial. But the thing that bugs me is the blatant double standards. Look at the headline. The way men read books might explain a lot. You imagine if I, as someone who's trained in journalism, I'm yet to really get into the industry because I have other work and have other distractions. But if I were to have a piece and I headlined it, the way women think about this may explain a lot, I'd be accused of sexism. There's no question about that. In point of fact, very few publications would even go there. But feminist writers like Lucy Mangan get away with it. I'm sick of it. There's another piece that, let's see, and when I think of the gulf of understanding that still separates boys from girls, men from women, when I think of the depth of ignorance, not stupidity, ignorance, albeit sometimes willed, that allows beliefs like she was asking for it, or questions like why didn't she leave, or motherhood to be presented as the pinnacle of female fulfillment, it's hard not to wish that there could be more than just the occasional Jane Austen on the syllabus, or that men were more widely encouraged, for all the women's prize trust's own efforts to address the gender bias, to pick up a book by a female author and see what goes on in there. And she quotes, rather crude dialogue from books by prolific, she hasn't named this prolific US male writer, who describes a female corpse as having a tiny handbag in her vagina, just big enough to hold her driver's license, a credit card, and a few bucks. Blimey, I bet she could tell a few stories. So she's taken one crude example of a male author and kind of representing this as the whole. She's suggesting that men and boys in general are closed-minded. I've personally read a number of female authors that I like. I've read some male authors that I found rather dull. So, I approach literature with an open mind. Um, but, this is the sort of thing, I get it. It's not going to get a huge deal of traction. I'm under no illusions about that. But even making this video, I'm criticizing a columnist in the Eye, so the editor of the Eye could see this video and say, "Oh, we're not going to give this guy a copy because he's criticized one of our columnists, or he dares to speak out against Misandry." I do think Misandry gets a free pass, and I'm sick of it. I'm sick of these generalized, sweeping statements on men and boys that you see every single day, at least once, in one of our national newspapers from a feminist writer. I'm sick of it. Um, and on some of her points there, she's talking about uh, gender bias and the pinnacle of female achievement being motherhood. She seems to be in a time lapse, because I don't think the majority of men see the pinnacle of female achievement as motherhood. We've had 3 women prime ministers in this country in recent years. Um, so it's just, I just think it's a rather lazy piece. Um, and it seems to be about Lucy Mangan's own chip on the shoulder regarding men. But she's not the only one. I I can't even remember all the female writers I've come across that have just had these casual rants about men. I'm sick of it. As a man, I'm sick of reading it, because I get the Eye because it has quite a good panorama on world news. That tends to be why I get it, actually. I like the way they present world news. It's a, very readable way. And broadly speaking, I like their, okay, it's centre left, but it's more centrist than the Guardian. And granted, probably you wouldn't find an article like that so much in the Sun or the Times or the Telegraph. You might actually get it in the Daily Mail. Believe it or not, the Daily Mail has a marginally higher female readership. I read that somewhere. I'm not sure if that still applies, but yeah, it's about time this misandry was called out. I'm not calling for censorship. I think people should be allowed their opinions, but there shouldn't be double standards. I think if male writers want to call out feminist hypocrisy, that should be allowed, and editors should have a little bit of backbone and not just kind of think, oh, we better pander to feminist opinions, but not allow dissenting voices against them. Um, but yeah, I would honestly say, confidently say, that Misandry gets a free pass, and I am sick of it. By misandry, I'm talking about casual generalizations about men and boys. I'm not necessarily talking about vitriol against men and boys, but we often hear misogyny designated as such when it's very similar sort of rhetoric. It's not hateful rhetoric against women and girls, but it's less than flattering rhetoric. So if misogyny is to be designated in that way, why not misandry? Why is it misandry continues to get a free pass? And it does. Absolutely, it does. The fact is, the word itself isn't even in popular usage, because I do believe that, with the exception of the trans issue, feminists have enormous privilege in institutions. They get enormous sway, much more than they think, because they have a much, much bigger voice than their critics do. I do believe that. They get to make these, just generic rants about men, and very often it's clutching at straws. I came across one which was a rant about how men supposedly take up the pavement. And then recently there's been one about how men supposedly ogle women in gyms, and, a gym is not a dating site, Well, again, this is the sort of hyperbole that's cooked up by feminists in the press, or by influencers with a chip on their shoulder. The majority of men that I'm aware of go to the gym. to be healthy, to set their own targets. They certainly don't go to look at women, and if they do, they're not as blatantly obvious about it as these influencers claim. But there's hypocrisy there, because they will go with the purpose not of getting fit, but of trying to get noticed. In fact, it's in the whole point of what they do as influencers. So it's a bit hypocritical. But yeah, I'm not calling for censorship. These feminist writers can believe whatever they want, but I think there should be more freedom and more of a platform for others to call them out and to say, well, actually, it's not cool to just generalize like that and say men and boys think this way, just as a generic block. Not all men and boys are the same. Speaking for myself, again, I've read women writers that I appreciate, and I've read some male writers that I find convoluted and dull. So I don't know what Lucy Mangan's talking about. In the highly unlikely event that she sees this video, I'm a man and I take issue with your misandry.